Good afternoon, members of the media, wider viewing and listening public of Trinidad and Tobago. Welcome to this week's post-cabinet media conference, and we welcome our Honorable Prime Minister back. And without further ado, we invite the Honorable Prime Minister, Dr. Raouli, to address us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Young. A very good afternoon to you, members of the media, members of the listening and viewing public. Thank you very much for sharing your time with us this afternoon. I want today, in this hopefully short press conference, to acknowledge the passing of a person whom I held very dearly. In my estimation, a model citizen on Trinidad and Tobago who came to us from another land and who represented the best that we could aspire to. I refer to the passing of Maulana Soleimani, who only, I think it was a few days before I myself left here, advised me that he was just diagnosed with an ailment, and he was proceeding to Pakistan, where he originated from, to get opportunities for further specialist treatment. It is with shock and a sense of deep loss that I was advised this morning that in that fleeting space of time, Maulana Soleimani has passed. It only reminds us how temporary we are. Matters not how powerful and destructive we might feel. In my own case, I advised you, members of the media, and through you, the national community, that I had certain alarms identified to me by my medical caregivers, which required urgent and detailed attention. This raised a number of concerns for me, my family, and for the many thousands of persons who took it to express their concerns. I want today to very sincerely, on my own behalf and on behalf of my family, all of us having been so comforted by the words of kindness and support and the many expressions of prayers and the congregations who sought a divine intervention on my part, I trust that we will continue to be such a kind and loving people, because there are benefits to be had from that. And my family and I have been the beneficiaries of those kindnesses. So I want to thank the national community, each and every one of you, individually and the congregations collectively, who provided me with that support during this very difficult period. I went to my doctors of long standing in California, and I underwent some very, very detailed and rigorous examination using very experienced personnel and leading edge technologies. Some of it available here in Trinidad and Tobago, and some of it not available. But I was much more comfortable in that very difficult situation dealing with the doctors who've known me for the last 25 years. And thankfully, at the end of it all, no major alarms requiring any intervention was the outcome of those proceedings. So I must let you know that those reports have given me a certain amount of I heard somebody describing me as a young boy. I'm not, but I may be. As Sparrow says, you're as old as you feel. And I feel well at this point in time. I've been cleared for my duties. As a matter of fact, the recommendations that I've had from my doctor is to increase my level of exercise, pay careful attention to my diet, ensure that I take whatever medication I've been taking, and there is no need for any alarm at this stage, and I am to be revisited sometime next year. So that's the program. So I want to thank everyone. I did observe a few comments from some quarters that going to California was a reflection on the health services of Trinidad and Tobago. Well, I want to say, without fear of contradiction, that nothing is further from the truth, and that we here in Trinidad and Tobago have a health service which not perfect, in many areas far from perfect, but it is nothing to be pride down or to run away from. In my own personal case, the choice of medical interventions, especially ones as serious as I was facing, are extremely personal, and one is comforted by one's own experience and choices. There's no reflection on the health services in Trinidad and Tobago. Ladies and gentlemen, there's one other matter. In fact, there are two other matters I want to deal with. The first one I wanted to deal with very quickly is another matter which I saw when I came, and that was the matter of the sale of an oil company asset, Paria Company. And I know that in Trinidad and Tobago it's very difficult sometimes to get a straight conversation going, because as soon as the conversation starts, a lot of spanners are thrown into the works hoping for a crash. It has been said by the chairman of Petrotrin I don't know the context in which he was speaking. I haven't seen the report. I haven't read the document. I haven't heard. I'm simply responding I'm responding to the responses that was carried in the local media. The chairman had said that Paria is for sale, and the minister has said that it's not for sale. And right away, I saw the government being accused by certain very prominent political voices of being guilty of economic crime and underhandness and all kinds of things. Ladies and gentlemen, these are developments that shouldn't really bring out such discomfort for us. In the case of the restructuring of Petrotrin, which I must remind the population, the restructuring of Petrotrin is a political decision made by the executive of the country. And that decision, by necessity, will have had to and continues to have in it a certain amount of political guidance. But I've also seen it said by another prominent commentator that the problem with the Petrotrin issue is that the government should leave the company to be run by the board. And it is the government that is interfering with the board why the company got into trouble. We can't have it both ways. We can't leave the board to be in charge and hold the government accountable. And on the other hand, we can't have the government run it if there's a board there. So that kind of arrangement should tell you that there are times when there are gray areas and there are times when there are narrow lines between the two. But if something happens, it is how we deal with it and explain it. And I want to explain it very clearly now. Paria. Paria came into being to ensure that in the restructuring of Petrotrin, since we were not going to be producing fuels like gasoline and diesel and so on, that supply is made available to us and to a lesser extent to our CARICOM neighbors who had depended on the Point-à-Pierre refinery, which was 100% state-owned. So having taken the decision to close the refinery, another decision had to be taken as to how we supply the market with those fuels which would no longer be produced in Trinidad and Tobago, but which are easily available on the world market. And there was another aspect to Paria as well, and that was the government maintained its position that it would have some element of control on the pricing of those products, even if they are not produced by our own refinery. Those are the facts. And that is what brought Paria into being. But Paria is a piece of the refining operation that used to take place here. The tank farms, the pipelines, the piers, all of these things went with the refinery. Because if you are refining, as in our case here, we were importing large volumes of oil, which we were refining, and we were exporting finished products. We had to store them, both the raw material and the finished products, so the tank farms come into play. And all of these things were part of the refining and distribution and marketing arrangements. So when we shut the refinery down, Paria came into being to deal with the other aspects of it. We said from very early, that we, the government, the people of Trinidad and Tobago, not having our own volume of oil to refine, and finding ourselves mired in losses through an importation and marketing process, that we will get out of it. But the refinery would be available for any other person who may have different circumstance, who may want to use by way of purchase or lease of the refinery. We've said that over and over and over. And that's why, having shut down our operation, we said that the refinery will be made available to some other entity by way of public open offerings. That would mean that such person may have money and want to get into the business. Such person may want to own a refinery. Such person may have oil available. They may have oil fields available. We don't know. That's why we've gone wide open. So it is quite wrong for any spokesperson in this country claiming to be a leader of some kind to be saying that we have fooled the population because we told them that the refinery was losing money, and now we're selling it to somebody who obviously will not lose money. That is not an argument. The new owner is going to be under new arrangements. They will have to find their own oil, find their own money, do all of those things, which we have done and have lost billions doing it. But maybe they could do it with their own oil and do it differently. How many of you have bought a used car before? How many of you know anybody who bought a used car? Because the original owner thought it was time to move on to something else. So because we are not using it does not mean that we have said it's of no value. A refinery will always be a valuable entity. It's not a chemistry set. But the bottom line is we have always been upfront with this. But there's a conversation in this country trying to give the impression that the government has been less than forthright and the government has something to hide, and worse, that the government has something under the table. I've seen it said in the last couple of days that the opposition is surprised that Petrotrin has borrowed $1.something billion. Now, how many times at this very podium in front of you, the media, have we told you that one of the major problems that brought about the restructuring and closure of the Petrotrin refinery is that over the years, even those who are speaking now, we have borrowed billions of dollars, which we are not in a position now to repay. And therefore, we had to come up with an arrangement of some kind to discharge that. And was it $850 million? We told you the amount. And we told you when it was due. And we told you before how much money we didn't have. And we told you if we didn't pay it, it will bankrupt the country. We'll get downgraded, because once you default in one area, through the cross-defaulting process, all your other loans become due. We discussed this from this podium. As a matter of fact, this government did something that no other government ever did. We hosted in public something called Spotlight on Energy, and put all our major issues in front of the world, in front of the country, in front of the companies, in front of the investors. Never happened in Trinidad and Tobago before. And I'm not aware that any country has ever done that. Yet, we are talking about now that the actual borrowing has occurred. Rather than be happy that we are able to raise the money to deal with it and have it not bankrupt us, you have people in this country who should know better, fooling those who don't know that something bad has happened. I want to say to you today that part of the restructuring of Petrotrin resulted in that loan moving from the Minister of Finance, who had the responsibility to find that money, to the company, the restructured company, to take the responsibility for it. And we should be rejoicing that we are able to find investors to refinance that loan and put us in a position now that is better than we were in when the Minister of Finance would have had to take it from education and health and wherever else it would come from. Because we have put the business in a position where the business could help the Minister of Finance to treat with a problem that we didn't create. That $850 million is past borrowing. Not to mention that we have to make new borrowings to continue managing the country. So when our facts are misrepresented, it only serves to spoil our day, upset us, and of course, allow our young people to remain in ignorance for the benefit of some. I know of no other government in this country that has been so open and consistently communicating with the population on matters of this nature. And at the end of it, bold-facedly, there are people telling you, we are surprised that the company go and borrow some money. Money to save the Minister of Finance and to save the company. And of course, if it is that we do find some entity that's interested in the refinery, let's say OWTU, is it reasonable to assume that what we have taken through expediency as PARIA, as I just described why we had to do PARIA, if that refinery is to come back into operation and a proposal comes to us from someone who's prepared to fund it, what do we say to them? Okay, you go ahead and run the refinery. We will keep the tank farms and the pipelines and the piers, and we will import and sell fuel in Trinidad and Tobago, the same fuel that you're making in Pointe-à-Pierre, that you can't sell it because we're competing with you. Do you see a difficulty there? Do you see any difficulty there? So PARIA will import fuel from outside, and the fuel being produced in Trinidad and Tobago by a company which now owns or is leasing the refinery, where does that go? Isn't it obvious that some kind of arrangement between PARIA and whoever is going to use the refinery, some modus vivendi has to be worked out? But we don't know what that's going to be, because until we see the proposals, all we do know is that the government has a commitment to maintain the control of fuel supplies and fuel availability and affordability in this country. That much we know. And if it comes to partnership with PARIA and who's going to run the refinery, or sale and whatever, or off-take arrangements, those are in the future. They aren't in front of us now because we have not seen the responses from the RFP. And it's the same thing that happened with the Sandals project, where before you get to a point where the information is available to be made available to the public, there are people in this country who want to know this, they want to have that, and they are jumping ahead of things and upsetting the country. As I can say to you now, there is no position taken by the government to sell the PARIA company, which is the fuel supply company. But based on what proposal is made to us, PARIA is an asset which the government will leverage to the best interests of the people of Trinidad and Tobago in protection of the principles I've just described. So I don't know why we need to detain ourselves any further about whether PARIA is for sale or not. Right? Many of those who are talking now never spend 1 minute in their private capacity, in a quiet moment, discussing or analyzing the strategic interests of Trinidad and Tobago. It's just jump and react. Tin pan policy all the time. Rah-rah policy all the time. But fortunately for me and a PNM government, we have spent hours and sometimes days discussing what is strategic in Trinidad and Tobago and what is not. I distinctly recall being in a group with Ken Valley, Patrick Manning, Wendell Motley, when the discussion for days is whether BWIA was a strategic interest and whether certain decisions which are far-reaching should or should not be made. That is the metal of which I have been made and of which the PNM is famous. We take our decisions. This Petrotrin decision was arrived at after a year and a half of consistent focus. And then we came to a decision when we had to make a decision. And yet, our detractors will say, we did something suddenly. And vice versa. It was very difficult. Many of the gears did not mesh with other gears. Some things went wrong, some things are still going wrong. But much of it has gone right because we were able to restructure the company, put a new structure in place. It's not delivering 100% now, but it has to work towards that. We are building a new arrangement. And in that transitional period, all I ask of the people of Trinidad and Tobago is to be reasonable and not to be distracted by those who have other agendas. Our only agenda is to ensure the successful outcome and the most successful outcome that's available to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And that brings me to the Venezuelan situation. I have this morning taken time to write what I'm going to say to you. I don't normally read for you, but I want to be particularly clear on this matter. So I will read it for you, and my staff, I think, have it on the computer, so you'll get a full copy electronically in a little while, and I can answer your questions after. And the title of this comment that I'm going to make now is The Origin of Trinidad and Tobago's Position on the Current Venezuela Situation. And we recognize that there is a deep and genuine lack of pertinent information, mainly in the age group 45 and below, as to who is Trinidad and Tobago in the rest of the world. Meaning our young people are not clear, and some of our older people don't want to be clear. And what exactly do we represent? Who are we in this very turbulent world? What have been our foreign policy and its moorings over the years in matters such as the invasion of Grenada by the United States, Venezuela, the presence of Nicaragua and its policies, apartheid in South Africa? What have been our principles and ideologies? Where did we get those principles and ideologies from? Why were they important then, and why are they still important now? Now more than ever, we need to revisit the significant events and connect the dots between our principles informing our decisions and show how these decisions have shaped who we are, to determine how we are viewed and why we must do what we do now. The gap or genuine ignorance in the younger demographic presents a real opportunity to reattach to the principles and ideologies that craft the personality of state and make us who we are. Very recently, we have seen our closest neighbor get shot into the center of a growing, smoldering global standoff. One so serious that we must be very concerned, as Venezuela is only 7 miles off our south coast. It is closer here to us in Port of Spain than we are to Scarborough. We are seeing superpowers squaring off and threatening the use of force in a country of 33 million people, 7 miles away from a tiny country of 1.3 million people. From the onset of this very worrisome development, you have seen your government taking a position of, quote, non-intervention and non-interference. You have seen your government join with CARICOM to push an urgent de-escalation of tensions and work on a forum of dialogue and negotiations towards a peaceful resolution of this very troublesome situation. You have heard us say we are guided by the UN Charter and that we subscribe to the fundamental principles that they contain, not because they are convenient or embody commitments that every self-respecting nation in the world holds to be universally true or right. We hold those principles because we as a people in 1962, when we joined the world as an independent nation, we believed those principles to be aligned with our own aspirations for all the people of the world, not the least our own people. These principles are the only guarantee that small independent nations can look to for preservation of their dignity and, I dare say, their very existence. We said that we believe in non-intervention and non-interference, and within minutes, the opposition and elements in the media shut off into spinning the term into a cop-out of some sort, or worse, that we have abandoned the people of Venezuela, people that we have had a relationship with for hundreds of years, because we are holding fast to the UN Charter to which we subscribe and in what we believe. While others are trying to say that we are copping out, it was in fact the complete opposite. We are standing up for principles we believed and signed up to at our birth in 1962. I would like to read something for you from the UN Charter. What we and other nations of the free world signed on to upholding for all times, at all times. And I quote here from the relevant UN Charter. And it goes like this. We, the peoples of the United Nations, determined to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, which twice in our lifetime has brought untold sorrow to mankind. To reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person, in the equal rights of man and woman, and of nations large and small. To establish conditions which justice and respect for the obligations arising from treaties and other sources of international law can be maintained, and to promote social progress and better standards for life in larger freedom. And for these ends, to practice tolerance and live together in peace with one another as good neighbors. At this point in time, we have to ask in Trinidad and Tobago, did we do that? To unite our strength to maintain international peace and security. Did we do that? To ensure by the acceptance of principles and the institution of methods that armed force shall not be used save in the common interest. Do we still believe in that? To employ international machinery for the promotion of the economic and social advancement of all peoples. Did we do that? I want to quote specifically the words of Article 1, the purposes of the United Nations. And it says, 1, to maintain international peace and security, and to that end, to take effective collective measures for the prevention and removals of threat to peace, and for the suppression of acts of aggression and or breaches of the peace, and to bring about by peaceful means and in conformity with the principles of justice and international law, adjustments or settlement of international disputes or situations which might lead to a breach of the peace. I want to repeat this for our young people here in Trinidad and Tobago who might be failed by the transient leadership, who would have forgotten what we have signed on to as an independent nation in 1962. I repeat, to maintain international peace and security, and to that end, to take effective collective measures for the prevention and removal of threats to the peace, and for the suppression of acts of aggression and other breaches of the peace, and to bring about by peaceful means and in conformity with the principles of justice and international law, adjustment or settlement of international disputes or situations which might lead to a breach of the peace. Are we doing that? To develop friendly relations among nations based on respect for the principle of equal rights and self-determination of peoples, and to take other appropriate measures to strengthen universal peace. To achieve international cooperation, and this is item 3, in solving international problems of an economic, social, cultural, or humanitarian character, and in encouraging respect for human rights and for fundamental freedoms for all without distinction as to race, sex, language, or religion. And 4, to be a center for harmonizing the actions of nations in the attainment of these common ends. Did we acknowledge that? Article 2. The organization, as the UN, and its members, in pursuit of the purposes stated in Article 1, which I just read for you, shall, in accordance with the following principles: 1. The organization is based on the principle of the sovereign equality of all its members. Do we still agree with that? All members, subclause 2, all members, in order to ensure to all of them the rights and benefits resulting from membership, shall fulfill in good faith the obligations assumed by them in accordance with the present charter. Do we still agree with that? All members shall settle their international disputes by peaceful means in such a manner that international peace and security and justice are not endangered. Are all our friends agreeing with that? 4. All members shall refrain in their international relations from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state, or in any other manner inconsistent with the purposes of the United Nations. This is the article where non-intervention and non-interference came from. Keith Rowley and the government of Trinidad and Tobago did not invent that. Those are the letters, the phrases, the sentences, and the paragraphs of the United Nations Charter. And when we pulled our flag up in 1962 and assumed sovereignty of these lands, which we call home, that is what we signed on to. All members shall give the United Nations every assistance in any action it takes in accordance with the present charter, and shall refrain from giving assistance to any state against which the United Nations is taking preventive or enforcement action. I want to repeat that. All members shall give the United Nations every assistance in any action it takes in accordance with the present charter, and shall refrain from giving assistance to any state against which the United Nations is taking preventive or enforcement action. Is anybody aware at this point in time that the United Nations is involved in the Venezuelan situation and is under this clause taking action which requires us as a neighbor, whatever we think of Venezuelan situation, this clause tells us that if the United Nations, through its legal process, is taking action against Venezuela or any state, that we have signed on to refrain from assisting that state. Outside of that, the assumption of this authority is nothing more than wrong and illegal. The organization shall ensure that states which are not members of the United Nations act in accordance with these principles so far as may be necessary for the maintenance of international peace and security. This government of Trinidad and Tobago and CARICOM, in every single action, in every single phone call, in every single letter and meeting, we were upholding and standing true to the principles of the UN Charter. Others may choose to go a different route, but we stick to the principles of peace, not war, to the principle of sovereignty, not imperialism or threats of violent coercion, to the principle of dialogue, respect, negotiation, and compromise, to the principle that independent countries should sort out their problems on their own, to the principles of being on good terms with all our neighbors, even when we disagree. We are standing up for these principles. Never mind, while we are doing our best, our detractors are doing their worst to misinform and undermine. When you stand back from the abyss, it's amazing how far they would go to sink the conversation into an emotional one about how we are abandoning the Venezuelan people and Raul is protecting a dictator and that all we care about is the Dragon deal and money more than we care about the people of Venezuela. Think about that, people. Think about the hours of TV and print time that was dictated to pushing these opposition narratives, to reducing the people of Trinidad and Tobago's position from the ones contained in the UN Charter to talking foolishness about selling out 33 million people in Venezuela for naked economic interests of a gas deal, as if we, proud Caribbean people, are to be so insulted. Let me once again put on record that our only wish for Venezuela is peace, stability, and prosperity of its people. I wish for them to find that within the construct of their sovereignty, internal peace, and the protection of the UN Charter. We wish for the people and children of Venezuela what we wish for ourselves: a life with dignity, fulfillment, and self-determination. We claim for the Caribbean that our corner of God's earth remain our designated zone of peace. And that's the end of my statement, and that is Trinidad and Tobago's position. As it was in the beginning, so shall it be now. I remember hearing members of parliament here in Trinidad and Tobago, members of parliament, call themselves honorable, who I call unworthy of the office, laughing at the CARICOM going to the United Nations to ask the United Nations to play a part against these charters that I just read, to ask the United Nations Secretary General to pay attention to us in CARICOM who have been totally ignored in the decision-making of the Lima Group, except for the few who could not see the pitfall signed on to it and then discover what the outcome was after. And today in Trinidad and Tobago, against the background of our existence as a small nation in a difficult area, seeking to make our way in this very difficult world, that there are people in Trinidad and Tobago who believe that because Trinidad and Tobago was not invited to the private residence of an American president, we are somehow diminished. Ladies and gentlemen, we have never stood taller. We have never stood prouder. As I speak to you now, CARICOM's position, as reaffirmed in the last meeting of heads in St. Kitts, is that there are 3 people representing and authorized to represent CARICOM outside of the heads and its caucus, and that is the chairman of CARICOM, who is the Prime Minister of St. Kitts Nevis, Trinidad and Tobago, through its Prime Minister or designate, and Barbados, through its Prime Minister and designate. There are 14 CARICOM territories, yet the conversation is about 4, or is it 3? 4. The Dominican Republic is not a CARICOM country. And while we are in this era and in this subject, let me not, for fear that others might use Dominican Republic's invitation as some failure in Trinidad and Tobago's part to get invited, I want to remind you all that it was right here in the Caribbean where hundreds of thousands of Haitian people were made stateless in a Caribbean country on the basis of the color of their skin, rejecting the right of birth in a land where they were born because they were Haitians. We don't have those as our problems. We can only speak as the government of Trinidad and Tobago for the people of Trinidad and Tobago and for CARICOM when we are so authorized. If you have any questions, I'll take them now. Yes, Anthony.
Prime Minister, would you please clarify the position on Paria? I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but are you saying that depending on the responses to the RFP for the sale of the refinery, that the government may sell the Paria assets?
I want to put my own words in my own mouth, but I understand what you're saying. Having taken the decision to restructure the company, having been forced to do that by the company's outlook and its financial liability to the taxpayer, the government has said over and over, we want to see the refinery in operation if it can be had. And we are going to do everything that is business-like to get the refinery back into operation. Because if the refinery is into operation, the fact that we don't own it doesn't mean it isn't valuable. All it means is that somebody else in the private sector would be doing it and having relieved us of the burden that we were carrying for how long. But we would want to do things to get the refinery back into operation. Because the refinery as an entity, as an economic entity, it matters not whether it's owned by the government and people here or owned by somebody from Abu Dhabi, Dubai, or Argentina. It matters not if it is there conducting that kind of business. So we want to have that. It will bring back jobs in the area. It will bring back the support jobs. It will, all the things that the refinery was doing that we couldn't afford to continue. If we can get the refinery started under new ownership, new investment, then we will do things like that. And if to do that, the proposal involves lease, sale, arrangements, contracts with Paria, the door remains open for that because we are not wedded to Paria for Paria's sake. And I explained to you a while ago, Paria came into being to solve a problem that was created by the closure of the refinery. And if the reopening of the refinery is to impact upon Paria, it seems to me to be quite reasonable that if that is what the proposal is going to be, and I say I don't know because we have not got the proposals as yet. So why should we close the door on a proposal that we have not seen? I am anxious to see what proposal we'll get. Because somewhere there might be somebody who may see Pointe-à-Pierre as their gold mine. The same way The same way a person buying a used car goes home to the family and you're very happy to be having your first car as a second-hand car. What I've said to you, and I want you to focus on what I've said to you, that we created PARIA to do two things: to ensure fuel security for the country and to control affordability to the population. So it matters not who is handling it. Those two principles would govern what we do with PARIA.
But do you not acknowledge that that was not the message, the nuanced message from the Ministry of Energy's statement on Monday?
The Ministry of Energy was reacting to a specific statement by the chairman, and the statement was, government is going to sell PARIA. The minister came back and quite correctly said that the government is not going to sell PARIA, because that decision was not taken, and as of now, no such decision has been taken. I am giving you the final word on this to clarify those two positions, that PARIA is a part of the restructuring of Petrotrin. And if the restructuring is going to end up with a restart up of the refinery, and it involves any input from PARIA, we would be crazy to have the refinery die when it could live because of PARIA. Because PARIA exists to provide us with fuel and to supply. And if there's a supply being made in Trinidad and Tobago, then clearly we have not got to the point as to how that supply and PARIA would coexist.
On the issue of non-intervention, do you not acknowledge that the meeting tomorrow at the U.S. President's private Miami residence with the 5 regional countries may in fact be an attempt by the U.S. to coalesce a group of Caribbean nations to agree with a military intervention in Venezuela?
I don't want to carry on a public discourse on this because I don't want to speak for U.S. foreign policy. But what I could tell you is not me. It is. I went into some length to show you the Lima Group. That is a meeting of the Lima Group. We, from early, St. Kitts, Dominica, Trinidad and Tobago, St. Vincent, and the Grenadines, we did not sign on to the Lima Group. So we're not reacting to an invitation to a man's house. Our foreign policy has always given us an insight of the road ahead. So what you've seen there is a meeting of Lima Group people at the private residence of the president. And it remains a position that we support. A man's home is his castle. You're free to invite who you want to invite to your house. We can't stay outside and say we should have been invited. Since when we're measuring our stature and our station by who invites us to the house? We are not about that. We are about the principles I've just outlined to you. And of course, I mentioned in my speech that there are 14 CARICOM countries. How many have gone to Mar-a-Lago? The ones who have agreed to be a part of the Lima Group. And what is the objective of the Lima Group? The objective of the Lima Group is regime change in Venezuela. How that is to be achieved is for those who have embarked upon that purpose. But what we are going to do resolutely and without apology, as a tiny speck on the world's map, on this globe, is to stand with the principles of the United Nations, where we all have signed on and accept as the best way for peace and security, not only in our region, but in the world.
Eugenia Charles, 1983, and the Grenada invasion that came shortly thereafter.
And what was the position of Trinidad and Tobago and George Chambers then?
Exactly as you have just outlined.
And what was the position of Errol Barrow, opposition leader then?
Exactly as you have outlined.
Thank you very much. So as I have said, I didn't invent this. This is Trinidad and Tobago standing true to what makes us a sovereign nation.
All CARICOM countries that are going to that meeting were part of the united position taken by CARICOM just some weeks ago. So then, what is the situation? Is it that they have consulted with CARICOM's leadership or membership
To the best of my knowledge, certainly Trinidad and Tobago was not consulted. We weren't even aware until it became news. So that aspect of it I can speak on for Trinidad and Tobago. I don't know who else was consulted. But at the level of the Secretariat, which is constantly in communication with us, before the decision was announced from Washington, we were unaware that this was happening. The Secretariat was not able to tell us that this was before us for consideration or decision or anything like that. The last and the standing decision of CARICOM was that the team, as put by the caucus to deal with the Venezuelan matter, and from a diplomatic standpoint, was, as I described a while ago, the chairman, St. Kitts Nevis, Barbados and Trinidad and Tobago. That is the standing CARICOM position. So any action of any member of CARICOM outside of that, acting in their own sovereignty, that's what it is.
Does CARICOM feel the need to maybe caucus and issue a statement reminding these people of the position taken by their countries and as CARICOM members?
I have seen no such initiative, and I don't know there's any need for that. We've just come out of a heads of government meeting in St. Kitts, which was, when was that? 2 weeks ago? 2 or 3 weeks, 3 weeks ago? About almost a month. But recently, we've had a meeting of the heads, and I can tell you, we sat in caucus and discussed all these things in detail, and people have different positions. As a matter of fact, many persons were surprised that there was a consensus position when we first issued that statement out after the Trinidad, we met by video conference. And even though members of the Lima group had voted at the OAS with the Lima group, subsequently when the president was installed in Venezuela, and that calamity was in front of us, the CARICOM members voted en bloc to support the initiative with Mexico and Uruguay. That resulted in CARICOM sending a team to Montevideo, and out of that came the Montevideo Accord, what you call the Montevideo Mechanism. And I want to draw to your attention, you members of the media, and if you don't believe me, go check it. Up to that point, with respect to the business and the troubles of Venezuela, the 14 Caribbean nations were totally ignored. Our position, our point of view, our concerns were not part of the conversation. As I said, since then, we've had contact with the Canadians, with the European authorities, and now some of our members have gone to the United States. We have maintained from day one, at the level of CARICOM, not just Trinidad and Tobago, at the level of CARICOM, that this is an issue we need to talk about, not fight about. And as long as people are talking, we are in a better place than people saying, time for talk done, time for intervention is now. That is our position.
The timing of the meeting between the U.S. ambassador and the opposition leader, especially given her stance on that whole Venezuelan issue, is, I don't suspect or is strange, or is it in any way an attempt to interfere in the internal affairs of Trinidad and Tobago?
The United States ambassador is the representative of a friendly country based here in Port of Spain, and he or she is free to go anywhere and talk to anybody. I have every confidence that in sober reflection, that the opposition leader of Trinidad and Tobago would familiarize herself with the position of the opposition leader Errol Barrow of Barbados during the Grenada invasion. That's all I can say. Yes, Jill.
Minister, just a moment. So, your position is, because the headlines are trying to be blanked by Mr. Trump and so on, your position is...
Let me just make that very clear. That headline is not mine. That is yours, as the media. I'm making it abundantly clear that when we speak as government, we speak for the people of Trinidad and Tobago based on data, fact, and measured judgment. So a headline like that wouldn't come from the government.
I didn't say it did. I'm just saying the opposition is that Trinidad and Tobago has not been blanked in any way by the U.S. president. I'm asking.
What you're asking me, whether I feel that Trinidad and Tobago was snubbed? Yes. But I thought I told you that Trinidad and Tobago has never stood taller and prouder. If it is, as you were saying, that we are being blanked and being snubbed for steadfastly standing for the principles of the UN Charter, then history will absolve us.
There's another aspect of this, Prime Minister, from one report that the meeting is also to discuss Chinese predatory economic practices. Is this something that is of any concern in terms of the United States' view of China's economic practices in the region?
Again, I cannot speak for the United States' view. What I can refer you to is your history, the history of Trinidad and Tobago. I know there might be those who would give us advice, but China is the second largest economy in the world and probably the one with the most cash available, owning much of what's outside of China. And there are those who may think that we shouldn't talk to them, work with them, cooperate with them. That's advice. Advice is, you can always get that, but I tell you your history. There was a time when China, at the United Nations, as allowed by the powers of the day, was represented by the island of Formosa, which is now Taiwan. And it was our founding father, Dr. Eric Williams, who, in the face of a similar kind of situation that you just raised, who, standing on principle, small, tiny Caribbean country, doesn't matter, the rest of the world, at the time, didn't agree or wasn't following that path. But we acknowledge mainland China as the representation of the people of China. All the countries of the world today, bar except one or two here and there, have accepted the People's Republic of China as the Chinese country. Trinidad and Tobago was in the forefront of that, against the advice of many. So if today our relationship with China is to be called into question, I would simply refer those who would question us to who we are, where we are, where we came from, and where we want to go. Yes?
Let me ask this question. While you cannot speculate on the President or the government of America...
Of course I can speculate. I choose not to.
Well, I'm saying, while you're not speculating, you choose not to speculate at this point in time. The American politician mantra is that they do what is in the best interest of the American people. They do what is in the best interest of the American people. That's their mantra. Therefore, if one should look at what you're doing here, which should be in the best interest of the Trinbago people, the question is, do you think that this present situation can strain the relationship, the political relationship with Trinidad and America, Trinidad and America?
Well, I don't see that a disagreement of this nature should strain any relationship. It should be easy for us to stand on the principles that we are standing on. What is more difficult is an alternative pathway to which the outcome is so uncertain. There may be other pathways that others may find, shortcuts that others may find. If we choose not to follow those shortcuts and they get there before us, it may very well be that we're all going in the same place. We all want the best for Venezuela and its people. But I don't know that any American lawmaker or government could reasonably hold an argument that we should not be faithful to the charter that we signed on at the UN in favor of some experiment which may or may not succeed.
Prime Minister, given the situation on the ground in Venezuela now, is our diplomatic mission there, embassy and so on, at full capacity operating, or?
No, it's not at full capacity, but we are pretty much running our issues in Venezuela from Port of Spain. As I just told you, Venezuela is nearer to us than Port and Scarborough. We have staff in Venezuela, and we are continuously there. We are continuously stamping our presence there, bring our staff home, brief them, they go back. We have relations with the government of Venezuela, and as I saw, again, one of these strange comments that Trinidad and Tobago is acknowledging Maduro as the government of Venezuela. I thought we had dealt with that in a press conference when we came back from New York. It was the Secretary General of the United Nations who told the CARICOM diplomatic leadership that until the General Assembly removes who is seated there, he, as Secretary General, has no choice, like Trinidad and Tobago, but to acknowledge and work with who is in Caracas at this time. If there are those who want to change that regime, until such time as it is changed, what the Secretary General said to us is what it is. So we need not make any problems for ourselves where problems don't exist.
Any update on the Dragon deal in terms of what has happened since the signing, given what's happening now?
I don't even want to mention that, for fear that it be given life in some people's argument, except to ask you, what deal does Barbados have, and St. Kitts, and Antigua Barbuda? What Dragon deal they're looking after? Why they are standing with Trinidad and Tobago on these principles? So let us not allow other people to tell us things about us which is not true. How much gas the Dragon deal would bring to Trinidad and Tobago? 200 scuffs? How much are we using on an average day now in the absence of Dragon? How much? 3.8 billion standard cubic feet? So why are we allowing that conversation to interfere with something? I mean, granted, it is part of the landscape. But there are those who would misrepresent that, and I'm saying that is an insult to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And for those who believe that our principle is as a result of Venezuelan largesse of its oil to the Caribbean, leave Trinidad and Tobago out of that. And the proof of the pudding is in our history. We didn't get anything from China when we stood with the one China policy in the beginning. We didn't get anything from Cuba when we said Cuba is a Caribbean state and the embargo against Cuba is unreasonable. We didn't say that apartheid should be destroyed because it's racist. In preparation for the independence of some African countries, this little Trinidad and Tobago, through our election on Boundaries Commission and our government of Trinidad and Tobago, we helped them to make their way into democracy and independence. We provide scholarships to Namibians to allow them to train people so that when they become independent, as they must, and as they have become, that there will be people there to run the country. We sat on the Security Council in 1985. So we are not insignificant, even though we are tiny. What is disturbing about this is that there are people in Trinidad and Tobago in leadership positions who fail to defend, if not the virginity, the integrity of this country. Thank you very much.
We've come to the end of today's weekly post-cabinet media briefing. Remember, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at TTT Live Online for all of the stories coming out of today's media briefing. I'm Mahalia Joseph Wharton. Have a good afternoon.